Garrett Sinclair had always known that buying the land would eventually put him at odds with someone. He just hadn't expected it to be nearly everyone. Maple Road cut across his property like a scar left by an old wound. It wasn't wide, barely enough for 2 cars to pass without slowing, and it curved gently as it ran from the county highway through a stand of aging maples before disappearing into Willowbrook Estates. The asphalt was cracked and patched, the paint faded to ghosts of lines that no longer mattered.
It looked public. It felt public.
And for years, everyone had treated it that way. When Garrett purchased the land, the road was there, and so were the assumptions. People waved as they drove past. Kids rode bikes along it. Delivery trucks used it daily. No one ever asked permission. No one ever questioned ownership. The previous owner hadn't either, at least not openly. He'd tolerated the traffic, let the road exist as a convenience rather than a legal agreement. And when he sold, that tolerance ended with him. Garrett wasn't hostile by nature. He wasn't looking to provoke a fight. But he was meticulous, cautious, the kind of man who read every document twice and kept records long after they were supposed to matter. When he reviewed the title, the surveys, the legal descriptions, one thing stood out with uncomfortable clarity: Maple Road was private. Entirely. There was no recorded easement, no dedication, no legal right for anyone else to use it.
At first, he did nothing. He watched. He listened.
He tried to understand how a neighborhood of hundreds could be built on something so flimsy. Then came the near misses. Cars speeding through at night. A delivery truck that veered too close to his fence. A group of teenagers using the road as a shortcut for dirt bikes, tearing up the shoulder and leaving beer bottles behind. When one rider lost control and slid into his pasture fence, narrowly missing a horse, Garrett realized that tolerance wasn't just inconvenient anymore. It was dangerous. So he installed a gate. It wasn't dramatic at first. A simple metal barrier with reflective tape, set back far enough to allow turnarounds. He posted signs explaining that the road was private property and that unauthorized access was prohibited. He provided contact information. He expected a few angry conversations, maybe some confusion. What he got instead was disbelief. The first people to confront him weren't hostile. They were confused. A middle-aged couple knocked on his door one evening, apologetic but upset. They explained that Maple Road was the only direct route to the highway for half the neighborhood. They paid HOA dues. Surely that covered road access. Garrett listened, genuinely surprised by how sincerely they believed it. He explained the situation as calmly as he could. They left unconvinced, not angry at him so much as shaken by the idea that something they'd relied on for years might never have been real in the first place. Word spread quickly. More residents came. Some were polite. Some were not. A few accused him outright of greed, of trying to extort the community. Others insisted he was wrong, that the road had to be public because it always had been. That phrase stuck with him. Always had been. As if repetition could substitute for law. Concerned that he might be missing something, Garrett hired Leonard Hartwell, a property attorney whose reputation rested on thoroughness and an almost obsessive respect for documentation. Leonard didn't rush. He spent weeks digging through development plans, county archives, zoning approvals, and correspondence dating back decades. When Leonard finally sat across from Garrett in his office, he didn't soften the conclusion. The HOA has no legal right to that road, he said plainly. None. No recorded easement. No prescriptive use that would hold up in court. The original developers changed the access plan to save money. They relied on a handshake and the previous owner's silence. That's it. Garrett felt vindicated and uneasy at the same time. Vindication was one thing. Living with the consequences was another. Leonard sent a formal cease and desist letter to the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, laying out the findings with clinical precision. It invited discussion, even negotiation, but made one thing clear: continued unauthorized use would not be tolerated. The response came not from a lawyer, but from Constance Meredith, the HOA president. Her email was sharp, indignant, and accusatory. She dismissed the findings as self-serving, accused Garrett of trying to hold the community hostage, and warned of consequences if he didn't remove the gate immediately. Constance was a force of personality. She'd been HOA president for years, elected and re-elected by residents who trusted her confidence and decisiveness. She spoke well, projected authority, and rarely admitted uncertainty. To her, the road issue wasn't a legal question. It was a challenge to her control. When Garrett didn't back down, the retaliation began. Code enforcement complaints appeared, alleging violations on his property that inspectors quickly found to be baseless. Social media posts circulated, painting him as an outsider who didn't care about families or safety. Anonymous flyers appeared in mailboxes warning that emergency services would be delayed, that lives were at risk. Garrett tried to respond reasonably. He offered limited access during certain hours. He provided emergency codes to local services. He even proposed negotiating a formal easement at fair market value, something that would give the community permanent, legal access. Constance rejected every offer. Compromise to her looked like weakness. The situation exploded at a community meeting called to address the Maple Road crisis. The room was packed, emotions running high. Constance stood at the front, framing the issue as a moral failing rather than a legal dispute. She spoke of children, of fire trucks, of community values. She named Garrett directly, calling his actions selfish and dangerous. When Garrett stood to speak, the hostility in the room was palpable. But he didn't raise his voice. He laid out the evidence, page by page. Maps, deeds, emails, development plans that showed the access change in black and white. Leonard spoke briefly, confirming the legal reality in terms even non-lawyers could understand. The effect was immediate and unsettling. People began to murmur, not in anger, but in realization. The story they'd been told didn't hold up. Constance's composure cracked. She tried to dismiss the documents, to reassert authority, but the spell was broken. Trust fractured in that room, and it didn't come back easily. Afterward, things got worse. Garrett upgraded the gate to an electronic system, professionally installed, with logs and monitoring. That night, someone spray-painted obscenities on it. The next week, his fence was cut. He received anonymous calls at all hours, threats whispered and shouted. One evening, a crowd gathered at the gate, shouting, demanding entry, shaking it until police arrived and dispersed them. Through it all, Garrett documented everything. Then tragedy struck. Mrs. Beatrice Caldwell, an elderly resident who lived near the far end of Willowbrook Estates, died in a house fire. Emergency responders took the longer route, arriving minutes later than they would have using Maple Road. Within hours, the story took shape in the public imagination. Headlines implied causation. Social media declared guilt. Garrett's name was everywhere, paired with words like heartless and killer. He didn't speak publicly. He couldn't. The weight of it was crushing. The investigations took time. Fire officials determined the blaze had been smoldering for hours before anyone noticed. Medical examiners concluded the delay did not change the outcome. Dispatch records showed that emergency access codes Garrett had provided were never relayed to responders. None of that mattered at first. Grief doesn't wait for facts. As scrutiny intensified, detectives uncovered something else. Evidence tied Constance Meredith directly to the harassment campaign. Emails, messages, misused HOA funds, coordination of intimidation. The picture that emerged was ugly and undeniable. She was arrested quietly one morning, charged with multiple offenses. The audits that followed revealed years of financial mismanagement. The HOA board collapsed. Elections were called. Lawyers stepped in. In court, the ruling was decisive. Maple Road belonged to Garrett Sinclair.
No easement existed.
No prescriptive rights applied. The HOA was ordered to pay his legal costs. Legally, he won. Emotionally, it felt hollow. Mrs. Caldwell's death haunted him, even knowing the truth. The community was scarred, divided by anger and regret. It took years to mend. A new HOA board eventually approached Garrett, humbler, careful. They negotiated a formal easement, paid fairly, with clear terms for maintenance and emergency access. A memorial fund in Mrs. Caldwell's name funded fire safety upgrades across the county. The case became a lesson, cited in legal seminars, prompting reforms that required formal easements for future developments. Informal assumptions were no longer enough. Years later, the gate still stood. Not as a weapon. Not as a threat. But as a reminder. Garrett often walked along Maple Road in the evenings, listening to the wind in the trees, thinking about how easily certainty could turn into harm. He knew he'd been right. He also knew that being right didn't erase the cost. The road was quieter now. And in that quiet, he carried the understanding that rights and responsibility were never separate things, only balanced, imperfectly, by human judgment.